So good to see each of you this morning and to be able to be together with the people of God, remembering that we are here because Jesus lives. And what a joy that is, and what a hope that is. I remember when I was in college, I think this was maybe my sophomore or junior year, we had, there were two people to a room, and we had, little twin beds, and the beds, you could take the hutch of the desk off and put it on the ground, and a little half dresser, and you could kind of make your bed elevated. And so in our room, my roommate landed both he and my beds. Mine was on this side, his was on that side. And we were both sitting up there on our beds talking about just life and what was going on, and talking about things that we were learning. He was a Bible major like myself, except he was more on the mission side. Mine was more on the preaching side. But anyway, we were talking about different things, but we weren't talking about any particular class or anything like that. We're just, talking about life, which, by the way, as an aside, sometimes as we get out of our formative years, we struggle. I find this in myself, that it becomes harder and harder with every year to have conversations where we're more vulnerable with each other. Have you noticed that when you are at a youth camp or something, you hear kids that are just so open about what's going on in their lives, in their hearts, their ambitions, their struggles, whatever the case might be. And I think we just become so cynical, right? So burned by the way the world is, that it's hard for us to really be ourselves, hard for us to share what we're going through and things like that. So anyway, that's just an aside. I'm sitting there talking to my roommate, Landon. Landon says, because we're talking about Bible-related things, Landon says to me, he says, "Nathan, I think that if I could only do half of what I know, I'd probably be the best Christian that's ever lived." Now, before you say, "Wow, Landon sounds like a really arrogant guy," that's not what he meant at all. He was making a confession to me. He wasn't making a statement about himself. He wasn't saying that if he could go out and do those things, he would be the greatest, and that was his ambition. What he was saying was, it's so much harder to do than it is to know. My guess is that in your life, you probably know that to be the case. That there are things that you know, and yet you struggle to do them. My guess is that you probably have even heard lessons about maybe a sermon, maybe a class, maybe a YouTube video, maybe an article, whatever. You've taken in content, information about certain behaviors that you have, certain attitudes that you have, certain habits of speech that you have, whatever the case is, that you've gone in and you've said, okay, I want to improve my character in certain ways, and so you've gone and listened to these lessons or whatever, and you've got 10 ways that you're going to overcome anger, let's say. You've taken in the information, you know the information. And yet you find yourself, when your child maybe has done the same thing 18 times in a row that you've said, don't do that, you find something happening where all of a sudden you forgot about those 10 things that you read, right, in what you do or say or think to yourself. Maybe it's the case that you've read a lot of things, or you've listened to a lot of lessons about, I need to guard my speech because I know that my words can hurt people and the tongue is sharp, and all of that. And so you say, I need to be careful about what I say. And you take in the information, and then you're walking away from a conversation and going, maybe I shared a little too much about so-and-so, right? I didn't realize at the time, but I acted with my speech in a way that wasn't consistent with what I knew I ought to do. One of the big challenges of life is trying to, I don't remember who said this, it'll come to me, but somebody said that when it comes to ourselves, one of the humbling realizations that we can realize, and he was especially talking about people that own businesses, but this is true for everyone. He says, you are your most difficult employee. right? You are constantly trying to incentivize yourself to just act like you know you should act. And yet it becomes something that is always there, a battle that continues to go on. It's almost like there's some kind of force in your life that is outside of just what you know that leads to your behavior. We tend to think of ourselves perhaps mainly as brains, mainly as minds, right? That we kind of have a body, but we really are our thoughts. Way back, Descartes, I think, therefore I am, right? We have minds, and that's the main thing. I think that it's in, I was reading. Well, there's several things that I'd like to say, but one of the things that I was reading was saying that in AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the things that you had to come to terms with is your best thinking got you here. Your best thinking got you here. I think I've put it a different way. You've been the mastermind of every one of your greatest mistakes. I don't know who said that one either, but our greatest thoughts sometimes don't translate to the behaviors that we would like to see, and sometimes they even lead us down paths that we later regret. Anyway, the point is, we think of ourselves mainly as brains, mainly as minds, and yet we realize that we are not logical machines. We are not just computers that walk around going, if A equals C and B equals C, then A equals B. That's not how life works. That might be how a logical part of us thinks, but that's not how we are as people. You are, I'm guessing, not Spock, even if you want to live long and prosper. I don't know if anybody, okay. Anyway, forget about that. So, in Proverbs chapter 4, Solomon tells us, which I appreciate Ethan for reading. Solomon tells us, above everything else, guard your heart, because from your heart flows everything that you do. So in the Bible, from the biblical perspective, the Bible has a little bit different view of who we are as people. I love the way that James K.A. Smith puts it in his great little book, You Are What You Love. He says, you are not so much what you do, what you think, all of those are important, but everything comes out of what you love, your heart. Proverbs, Solomon says, I need you to know, son, you need to guard your heart, because from your heart comes all that you do. Now you might say, yeah, that makes sense, right? That we have these deep desires, these longings. Even Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he described the disciple as someone not who had all the information, but someone who had a hungering and a thirsting for righteousness. What is that? He's saying a heart that is wanting more, a heart that is pointed at Jesus and saying, I'm just starving here, just please feed me with a little more, and a little more, and a little more, right? A longing for something more. In Philippians 4, Paul talks about how important it is for us to consider what we meditate on, what we think about regularly. But in Philippians chapter 1, Paul helps us to realize that we think about what we love. Notice in Philippians chapter 1, which I have read to you a few weeks ago in our sermons, in our sermon series, I should say, on Philippians, Paul says in Philippians 1, verse 9, Philippians 1, verse 9, he says, it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more, with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent and be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness, right? There's that character, there's those deeds that comes through the gospel of Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of our God. What Paul says in Philippians 1 is that ultimately, he could have said, I'm writing so that you can know all that you need to know. But Paul says, you're not fundamentally a brain. You're not fundamentally a thinker. You're fundamentally a lover. You have longings, desires that steer you through life. And I want you to have your love, your affection, your desire shaped by the gospel. When you think about what Paul is asking here, he's really saying and calling us to think about what we love. What do you love? What do I love? And on the one hand, it's kind of an encouraging thing to think about, okay, I realize that I can have all these thoughts, but until I think about my desires, I'm not going to make progress. And so we can start thinking, 5 ways to get my heart on track. And that's good. But the thing I'd like to challenge you with today is asking yourself if you know what you love. If you know what you love. Because when it comes to love, in our world, we have sort of a romanticized view of love, right? It's mostly how we feel, our emotions. But in the Bible, it's this kind of inner longing and yearning. Really, it's the thing that you want more than anything else. That's your love, right? That's the goal to which you are headed. Do you know what you love most? Do I know what I love most? And the answer to that question might be yes, but it also might be no. There's a story that's told from a couple of guys from Russia, authors last century. They tell this story of these 3 guys that are they're on this quest to find this room. And this room is going to grant them their heart's innermost desire. And so as they're traveling, they find this, they have one of the guys is a guide, and he's leading them through, up and down, trial, whatever. And they finally arrive to the room. And the promise of the room is the room will instantly grant to you your most inner desire. Your truest want will be given to you. And both of the men who they've gone high and low, they finally got to the room. They stop on the precipice of the room. They got their hand out for the handle, and they're pausing. Because the promise of the room is not that they will get what they say they most want, but what they actually most want. And they're starting to think, I better make sure before I open this door that what I actually want is what I say I want. How do I know what I actually want in life? How do I know what I'm actually striving for? In Jeremiah, I think part of what Jeremiah is getting at in Jeremiah 17:9, he says, the heart is deceitful above everything else. It's desperately sick. Who can understand it? Who can cure it? That our heart is deceiving us. It's tricking us into thinking that we have our ultimate desire and affections oriented in places that maybe we actually don't. Because when I say, what do you really love? What do you really want? Probably most of us are thinking, well, Jesus first and family second and friends third and country and the world, whatever. I don't know. But there's things that come into our mind that we might say we want more than anything. But Jeremiah says, are you sure? Do you really know that? Smith gave a great metaphor for this when he was talking about the heart sort of being like the autopilot for life. I don't know when the last time you took a long drive was, but if you're driving down a familiar road, like your commute, maybe if you have a commute, you're driving down your commute and maybe you got a 20-minute drive or 15-minute drive, doesn't matter. Have you ever gotten in your car, fired up the engine, you started driving out of the parking lot, and next thing you know, you're pulling into your house? Does that ever happen? Right? Have you ever been on a long trip, like a 10-hour road trip or a 20-hour road trip? Maybe you're driving from Georgia to Colorado, okay? And suddenly you see the GPS here, it says 9 hours and 49 minutes left till arrival. And you're like, just turn that thing off, right? We don't need to know that. But then suddenly, whether it's from conversation, whether it's from music that you're caught up in, maybe you're just in your own head thinking things, you look down and it's like 9 hours and 23 minutes left. So what just happened? Where'd those miles go, What was going on? You were driving, but were you driving? Well, yeah, you were driving. you've trained your body, right? Conditioned your body to know how to drive. And even when you're not thinking about it with sole focus, you're still driving because it's part of who you are. You have conditioned and trained yourself to be able to do that. That is sort of like what is going on in our heart. Jesus says in Luke 6, verse 45, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the abundance of the heart. How your heart is conditioned, how it's formed, how it's shaped through constant use, through constant action, through habits and through practices. The more that your heart is used in a certain way, Jesus says, out of the abundance of that is going to come your speech. I was watching a video that, I'm not going to play it, but I was watching a video that was really, really sweet to me. And it was Martin Short, I think, was being interviewed by a couple of people. It might have been Good Morning America, I don't remember. But they were interviewing him, and they didn't realize that his wife had passed away like 3 years before this interview was being done. And so they ask him, they say, but you and your wife, you guys have just such this beautiful relationship. And he says, yeah. And they say, how many years has it been? And he says, he doesn't even say, we were married for, he just says, 36 years. It's 39 years, but 36 years before she passed away. And they're just like, how do you keep that going? And you just see this trueness to his affection for her in this video. What caught me, though, was not that he loves her and not that he was thinking about her and all that. It was that you can see on his face, he never even considers making them look bad in the video. He never says, oh, wow, you don't know that she's passed away 3 years ago. It's a very insensitive thing to ask, you know. He says, oh yeah, I love her. 36 years. Out of the abundance of your heart, the mouth speaks. You can't practice for that, like, okay, I'm going to think about every question this person could ask me in this interview. Your whole life is practice for that, right? Your heart in constant use is preparing to do something, to live out in a certain way. And Jesus says, from the abundance of your heart, the mouth speaks. And Solomon says, above everything, guard your heart. And so the question that I want to ask you is, what do your habits say about what you say you love most? Now that's a tougher question. What do your habits say about what you love most? Because I could say that I really want to be productive. And then I could find myself having a habit of just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. By the way, my phone tells me Bitcoin is up 5%, if anybody wants to know. All right. So I have no idea how old that was. That could have been months old. Okay. No investment advice here today. So you can look at your phone and you can say, okay, I'm really going to be productive. I'm a productive person. I'm the kind of person that gets things done. And then you're on that Facebook reel algorithm. Then you're on TikTok. Then you're on YouTube. Then you're on. And then pretty soon, I need to get some work done. I saw this thing, it was a graph of productivity. The first thing was like, waking up and getting ready. And it has, this line here, getting coffee or whatever. And then it says, putting your phone down. And then it goes up, okay? Because sometimes we have to get away from, get unplugged from things. I might say that, I really want, or you might say, I really want to be a patient person in my life. But the second you get in the car, it's, I got to get there as quick as I can. Or, can you believe that person did that? I might say, I really, really want in my life to have a close relationship with Jesus. And yet, my habits don't show me cultivating that connection with Christ. That time talking with Jesus when nobody's looking. That time listening to the voice of Christ speaking to me through His words? Do we know what we really love? Now, the reason, and this is true of James Smith's good book too, but the reason for him writing that book and the reason for my lesson today, and we'll talk about habits some more in the next coming weeks, the reason is not for doom and gloom. I didn't come here today with a word of, get better habits, figure it out. The first step in having our hearts reoriented, reformed, reshaped, if I realize that the thing I need most is not to have more information, but it's to have my heart shaped, my desires shaped through constant exercise to go towards the desired goal, which is Christ, if I realize that that is what I most need, then the first step in that process is coming here today together and just saying, boy, I don't know if I always love what I say I love. I don't know if my habits and behaviors are always in line with what I'd like to think is my ultimate goal. And to hear that the gospel is for people like you and people like me. Because Jesus has not been surprised by the mistakes that you've made in your life. Jesus did not say, let me just see how this plays out, then I'll die for that person, right? While we were still enemies, long before we had even an inkling of desire that we were going to say, I'm going to try to follow Jesus, I want to be a disciple, that at that time, God so loved us. And that's why our heart can be shaped, how it can be formed again through Jesus. That we can have a new man in us, right? A new person living in us. That's the metaphor that Paul uses on a number of occasions through what Jesus has done. Why? How can we learn to love? John says we love because He first loved us. Because we have received that love, we're able to have our loves changed, our direction, our true longing changed. So that by the end of our life, if we're standing there and we're standing at the precipice of the room, right, of getting our deepest dream come true, we could simply open the door because it's going to be heaven. That's what we really want, is life with Christ forever. It may not be what we always want by what we do today, but that God is shaping our hearts so that over the course of our lives and through the work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts, that our affections are going to be so changed that at the end we really would want exactly what God wants for us in our life. And the great news of the gospel of Jesus that we read, what Paul says to the Philippians in Philippians 1 and Ephesians 3 that we read this morning, what we're seeing there is this great truth, this great news that Jesus understands the nature of our problem, that we were in Ephesians 2 by nature children of wrath. I mean, we were alienated from God. We were dead in our trespasses and sins. He realizes the severity of where we are, but He also is sufficient for not just resuscitating us to a second try, but in leading us to have our whole heart rewired for loving Him and following Him. And so as you go through your life, my encouragement to you is today that you realize that the most important thing about you is not how much you know, but it's about how strongly you love Jesus Christ. Because the stronger that you love Him, the more it'll lead to knowledge, the more it'll lead to the fruit of righteousness. That's what Paul says in Philippians 1, verses 9 through 11. And if you are here today and you know, yeah, I probably don't love the things that I might like to say that I love, I probably don't actually have those desires that I know that I ought to have because my behavior, my habits consistently demonstrate that I don't. And maybe you're a Christian, you're saying, I need some prayers for that I might be strengthened, that I might grow in that. Or maybe you've never even become a Christian before and you're thinking about it for the first time this morning and you're saying, I want to follow Jesus. I want to have my heart reformed, reshaped, because I know that from my heart flows all that I do, and out of the abundance of my heart comes every word, every action, and out of the abundance of my heart has come every hurt that I've ever caused in this world. And out of the abundance of my heart has come every regret that I wish I could take away. And out of the abundance of my heart has come every guilt and every shame and every fear. But in Jesus, I can get a new heart. I can get a new direction. I can get my heart shaped like clay, once again, pointing me to life forever with Jesus Christ. If that's you this morning, you want to be baptized into Christ, you want to receive a grace that comes through faith in Him, we want to invite you to do so as we stand and sing.